In this video, I would like to discuss using a larger gun in games of the Men Who Would Be Kings. In the Men Who Would Be Kings, crude weapons are described as machine guns or mountain guns. And while the rules are not intended for larger guns, if you are creative, you can use them. And the gun I'd like to discuss today is the 5-inch breech-loading Howitzer. This gun was adopted by the British in 1895, and its first combat use was at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898. And the gun did perform fairly well there. Now, when the gun went to South Africa for the Boer War, it ran into a number of issues. Mainly that the payload, explosive payload, was too small, the range was too short, and the gun was considered a little heavy for a field gun. In spite of the gun's issues, it would continue to be used throughout the Second Boer War, though in the second half of the war, not as much. And the gun would remain in use, and it would see use even into the First World War, especially in the Middle East and Africa. Now, when it comes to using a gun like this in a game of the Men Who Would Be Kings, there are a number of considerations, and there are a number of things that make using a gun like this pretty plausible. And the first thing you really have to look at are the capabilities of the gun. The gun did have depression sufficient that it could be used in a direct fire role. It also had the ammunition that would allow it to do that. The ammunition types we're concerned about are the common shells, the shrapnel shells, the star shells, and the case. Now, as you dig into the manual and you start to look at the range tables, you'll see that the shrapnel shells allowed this gun to be used in a direct fire role, and you could really start to use it beginning at around 150 yards. You could time the number 54 fuse to explode at 100 yards, and you'd want to allow 50 to 100 yards for the maximum spread of the shrapnel. And this would, of course, depend upon how close the enemy troops are clustered. So you would start to see effect really if the enemy was at 150 or 200 yards. The other ammunition type that actually factors in if we're going to use this in a game of the Men Who Would Be Kings would really be the case shot. And that's going to be, most of the time, you'd probably want to use case shot, as that's effective as soon as it leaves the barrel. It hits most of its effectiveness at around 250 yards, but it remains effective out to 400 yards, depending on how close the enemy's clustered. The time in flight would be between 0.4 of a second and 0.75 of a second for the shell to actually explode, if you were using shrapnel with the number 54 fuse. Now, none of this is really important in terms of playing the game. You don't have to specify what type of shell you're using or what range you're going to use it at. But from a historical wargaming standpoint, it's just nice to know. I mean, I feel that's why we do this, to try to wring the most accuracy out of these games as possible, historical accuracy. Now, if we take a standard 4x6, gaming surface, gaming matter table, it means for the most part you would be using the case shot. But if you were to shoot diagonal from one table corner to another, you could plausibly use the shrapnel with a timed fuse if it were to explode at 100 yards, allowing 50 yards or so for expansion of the shrapnel. If I were to use a 5-inch howitzer in a game, I would probably treat the gun as immobile, because it was a heavy field gun, but I would also likely give it 2 more dice when I'm rolling for damage. Now, if you were to choose to apply this sort of logic to your own games and your own guns, you could do the research. It's pretty easy. You can find the range tables and the types of ammunition that would have been used with these larger guns, and you can apply it to things like the 40-pounder breech loader, or the French 24-pound siege gun, stuff like that. You could just apply it. You could add more damage dice. You could make it fire at a slower rate. There are a great number of ways you can modify the rules to make this sort of thing work, and that's just something to think about. It'll make the games, I think, more interesting, and you'll learn a lot more about the equipment that was actually used by the armies. And so that's my, I think, hopefully not too long video on how I plan to use my 5-inch breech loading howitzer and the type of things you can think about and you can apply these sort of ideas equally to any number of guns. And so that's it. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.